We learned a lot yesterday. We learned that you guys have no problem defending your team against the likes of even Tom Brenneman. It made me feel good because I thought y'all just beat up on me for having anti-Bengals takes. And I'm not saying he was anti-Bengal, but nobody's safe. You guys will fight to the death for your team, and I respect the hell out of that. I respect
equal opportunity here at Chatterbox.
Yeah.
That's right. Anyone can get it.
Anyone can get it.
But and they got it. But guys, good morning. Happy Friday.
What a beautiful morning it is. This is the day we all wait for. It's Friday.
I mean, what a beautiful morning. You're right. What was it, 8 degrees?
Yeah, it was like 4 degrees.
I was crying walking from my car to the door.
I left a little bit of water in my cup in my car, frozen, completely frozen. I had to throw the whole cup away just with frozen water in it. But yeah, other than the temperature, I would say it's a beautiful day outside.
Casey, good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
You are Joe Burrow's bodyguard. You are I mean, you've protected him more than that offensive line throughout his career. I tell you what, you were peak Casey yesterday. You were peak Casey yesterday.
Yeah. I'm a Joe Burrow defender. What can I say? Through and through, I will defend my guy to the ends of the earth. And I just don't think he's wrong. I don't think he's in the wrong here going around and advocating to pay your stars. I didn't think that was such a controversial take, but we'll get into it more, I guess, later on. But
the Bengals have never had a Super Bowl roster.
Never been a perennial Super Bowl team, and I guess they have no idea how to build a Super Bowl roster.
Real quick, Casey. We got a member chat here. Shout out Ricky, 13 months. If the Bengals fail to win a Super Bowl with Joe Burrow, do you think they ever will?
Certainly an uphill climb. You have to get really bad in a year where you're lucky enough to get another Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I think the thing can be the way that it's a little tough to talk about this because the AFC's been dominated by 2 quarterbacks for so long that it's hard to imagine if they don't win with Joe Burrow, a guy who's been able to break through and get to a Super Bowl, that they could ever win one. But I won't say that they never will. I mean, there's a long time.
I would say that. If they don't win with Joe Burrow, I would say that there's a – I mean, what quarterback are you going to get that's better than Joe Burrow? I'd argue none.
Well, the circle of life, at some point you get new owners.
Well, if that's the case, then
I'm just saying.
Well, that question. Okay, but that question's based on this ownership group.
No.
Yes.
I'm a Bengals fan. I'm not a Brown family fan. He said, "Will the Bengals win a Super Bowl after Joe Burrow?"
If they change ownership, then yes. Same with the Reds. Same deal with the Reds.
It's true.
And it's up to you guys. Should we just dive into this? Do you want to come back to it? How do we want to proceed? Because we're a few minutes in, and we seem pretty fired up about it. So it's up to you guys.
Let's talk about it.
Push the headline. Craig might be real mad if we push the headline.
Well,
back.
here's a little inside baseball for this headline. I've got none. So I've got like 5 headlines.
Even better.
I've got the Team USA hockey match as one of my premier headlines.
Formations was sick.
So that's what we've got on headlines today.
We'll touch on it later.
Well,
okay.
We'll touch.
Push it
Yeah.
back later.
A filler segment, if you will. It's a Friday.
Yeah.
Who cares at this point, right? Let me say this about this Joe Burrow situation, about what Tom said yesterday. So it was Tom and Luke, it was not fair. I mean, it was like a handicap match. I mean, you guys were just ganging up on those two. Those two didn't stand a chance. I wanted to tag in, but I didn't really want to anger everybody all in one day. But no, so there's only one thing that Tom said that caught my attention, because we always know. We know why guys are doing certain things. We know why Joe Burrow is doing this media tour. We know, and we say the reason why. Well, Joe Burrow's doing this to put the pressure on the front office. And we say it, and that's the logic, and that's the reasoning. The only thing that Tom said yesterday that got my attention, that really got me to kind of hone in on the conversation, was he goes, pressure on what? This is a front office that has just been buried by fans for pretty much its entire existence, especially in recent decades. They've had not a quarterback the caliber of Joe Burrow, of course, but I mean, this is it's not that much different than what Carson Palmer was advocating for in the early 2000s, which ultimately led to his departure. They've had their starting Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, and Joe Burrow's better than Palmer, don't get me wrong, but they've had their starting great quarterback go at the front office and say, we need to do this to get better, and they ignored it. Fans have been on them forever. That pressure's never worked. National media has made fun of this organization forever. That pressure has never worked. So I understand what you guys are saying when you say, well, yeah, he's doing it to put pressure on the front office. But I mean, we had Jay Morrison on, I think, right when the whole thing started with Jamar Chase last year, and we were like, man, who's going to blink first? And Jay Morrison, the quote that still sits to me to this day, Mike Brown doesn't blink. He will not blink. He will not back down. He will not fall for the public pressure. You guys were just talking about potential new ownership being the difference in the future of this organization. Unfortunately, that might be the case. The thing is, I will say this. If Joe Burrow, the pressure he's trying to put on the front office, if that doesn't work, if he can't get them to cave or change their ways, I'm not being negative or hating on your organization, but there's no chance in hell you will ever accomplish anything with that ownership group, because if Joe Burrow can't get them to change their ways, there's not a single human walking earth or unborn to be walking earth in the future that will get them to change their ways. So that's the only thing. When Tom said that, it got me thinking, I don't think pressure works. I mean, he has to try something. I just don't think pressure is going to work. I don't know. Again, to be fair, if we're having this conversation in August heading into the preseason, I think that's, means to be concerned. But for right now, let's see what the offseason brings. But I don't know. Pressure has never worked in the past. It didn't work last year. I mean, the pressure of Joe Burrow being upset that Jamar Chase didn't get a deal done. Joe Burrow wanted T. Higgins 2 years ago, and they were still almost willing to let him walk. So I don't know. I'm curious your guys' thoughts. We know the reason for Joe Burrow doing this, but it almost seems like a waste of time, because there is no proof in the history of this organization that pressure is going to get this ownership to cave.
You're absolutely right. There is no proof, and there's really no reason for us to believe it will cause them to change. But it's something we haven't seen before. Even Carson Palmer, when he was asking for the contract and everything, that was what we were talking about yesterday. That was the more behind closed doors approach. Ask for what you need, and once they say no, once they tell you they're not going to go that route, you demand the trade, you threaten retirement. We all know how that story went. Joe Burrow is using something that, when the Bengals have been under the magnifying glass, the very few times they have been labeled contenders, there hasn't been social media. There hasn't been these shows, at least not at this level. And Joe's getting out there and putting the light on the Bengals front office, saying what they're doing, showing what they need to do, letting his voice be heard. And I think it's the best chance we have. I don't know if it's going to work. I would, venture to say it probably won't. But I know for sure Joe Burrow sitting at home wouldn't work. So this at least gives us a chance to change how it is. And I wouldn't, ever say it's wrong of him to try to influence the front office to change, because he recognizes that the way they've operated in the past isn't good enough to win anything, and he's trying. So I give him props for that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to work right now. The only time they would have to be forced to listen to is, let's say they pay no attention to Joe Burrow, what he's doing on this media tour. They pay no attention to what the national media thinks. When they're going to start paying attention is if they don't bring back T, they don't bring back Trey. Joe gets pissed off. Joe asks for a trade down the line. And then you have people stop showing up to games. And then the stadium becomes empty. Like, that's when the ownership would have to listen. And unfortunately, I hope it doesn't get to that final step where people are boycotting going to Paycor Stadium. But maybe that's what it takes. Maybe that's what it takes. Just stop showing up completely. It certainly hasn't stopped the Reds, given the fact that nobody really shows up to those games, and they're still hanging around. So I would imagine that it would take a full-on boycott of the franchise to get the ownership group to fully listen. And that's I guess the benefit of owning the team. You don't have to listen to anybody as long as you're making your dollar. Who cares?
Casey, and jump in here, because I know obviously you were in the middle of it. And by the way, dialed in yesterday, great segment. Tom weighed in on his take on this, and it was a rare one because, by the way, I know many people. I got a note last night saying, "Oh, I bet you can't wait for the show today because you're going to let them have it because I bet you agreed with Tom." First of all, no disrespect to anyone when you disagree with them, but no, I actually didn't agree with Tom. This is going to go back to our debate between me and Elliot about Joey Votto coming up in a bit. But I do want to send it to Casey. Yeah, I want to send it to Casey because obviously you were fighting hard for this yesterday, but when Tom said that to you, that's what got my attention about it. When he said pressure to do what, we know why they're doing it. There's no proof that this organization is going to cave to that pressure. I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that idea either. I mean, I think that there is a good chance that this does not sway the front office one way or the other. And I think that's a bad thing. I think that's a very negative thing. And I think fans will see it that way too. I think when you talk about the Carson Palmer era, a lot of people feel like he kind of gave up on the city way too soon. And the injury history, him kind of like starting to tail off in his production didn't help with that either. Joe Burrow is quite literally, if he wins a few more games, MVP of this league. I think that's a no doubt, no brainer for most people. That means that if they don't listen to him now, they'll never listen to anyone, and I think fans will be very upset with that. And I think fans will start to lose their trust in this organization more than they ever have. I think it'll be lower than it was with the Carson Palmer era. And I said in that segment, thank God they found A.D. Dalton and A.J. Green to kind of help them dig themselves out of that spiral, because otherwise it was going to be really horrendous. So for me, I just feel like if they don't listen to him now, it is just going to be an absolute hellstorm for all these fans around the city. I mean, it'll shake my core, and I'm one of the biggest diehard Bengals fans out there. I don't know if I could ever trust the ownership again. And a lot of people in here will say, oh, you're just a young Bengals fan. I've already been through this and that. This is a little bit different than the Palmer era. This is a little bit different than the 80s. This is someone that is generational talent-wise, and you're going to just let him rot. You're going to let him just fester here without helping him at all, without trying to be a modern organization, doing everything that you can to help him possibly win this year, because this year is the most important year. Just count me out if that's the case.
Fair enough. Again, this is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. Justin Kinner, Casey McAllister, Elliot Rearing, Jacob Tissett with you here. We'll step away for a few moments. We'll pick up with this when we come back. Again, and in the chat, weigh in as well. Do you believe that this pressure that Joe Burrow is putting on through this media tour, do you think it'll work? Based on the segment yesterday with Tom, basically saying pressure for what? Like, he doubts that pressure is going to amount to anything. Do you guys agree, disagree? Will this media tour that Joe Burrow has gone on, do you think this will be enough to finally pressure the front office into changing their ways? We'll continue on with this when we come back. Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. And we are back off the bench right here on Chatterbox Sports on YouTube, 1410 ESPN Radio in Dayton. Justin Kinner with you here, along with Casey McAllister, Elliot Rearing, Jacob Tissett, off and rolling here on a Friday. Do you believe the pressure will be enough to sway the front office to change their ways? And I know we've kind of all weighed on this slightly. I know we're going to close out this conversation here, this segment, but just quickly around the room, do you think this will be is this enough? Like Joe Burrow, I mean, he's doing this because he feels like, and it sounds like we're repeating this segment a lot. There's just more layers that keep coming out. And I think it's cool. And until we know what the front office is going to do, unfortunately, this will be a repeated talking point for a lot of shows throughout Cincinnati and honestly throughout the NFL, because every time anytime SportsCenter or ESPN or the Fox Sports talk shows, CBS Sports, whatever, this is one of the biggest storylines this offseason. So do you guys think this is going to be enough at the end of the day? Like, it may not lead to a whole full-on change in one offseason, but do you think it's going to be enough to pressure them into getting these deals done at the end of the day? And the front office can come out and say, hey, we were going to do this anyway. Joe Burrow didn't need to go do this. I don't know. I don't know where this is going.
Unless their intent is to lose the franchise, they have to do it. So if they're content on not having a city that supports them, then feel free to not extend anybody, not bring anybody back. Feel free to go that route. I would venture to say that that's a route that probably shouldn't be taken if you're still in favor with this city. The city still showed the team was terrible last year, defense at least, and every single game was still sold out. Nobody stopped going to games last year despite everything. I don't think that if you let this all go down the way I think it might go down, which is to not bring back anybody and we're just going to go different directions everywhere, I think if you go that route, then you're going to lose everything. And I don't think that that's a risk that anybody's willing to take for a couple dollars. You can make every single move and be fine. You can do all of it. You can do the Jamar deal. You can do the T deal. You can do the trade deal. Nothing changes. Except you have three bona fide superstars that are playing for the Cincinnati Bengals on top of having Joe Burrow. That's the part of it I just will never understand. If they go the other route, they're going to lose it all. And I don't think they're going to lose it all.
Yeah, I'm more confident with all of this than I ever have been, and them keeping everyone. So I think, I think it will work at least to a degree. Whether they get everything done, I don't know, but that could be the difference between T. Higgins wanting the 33 he gets on the open market versus the 30 the Bengals are willing to offer him. So we won't even know how close they got on some of these things if that is the case. I think where we will really find out is what they say afterwards and how the fallout is from the players. If T. Higgins ends up leaving and it's because the Bengals couldn't get up to the $35 million offer or whatever it is that he somehow gets somewhere else, I think there's a completely different tune from these guys because we've seen transparency from the players, which we've never gotten from the front office before. So I think, if anything, we'll at least understand what happened this offseason if they don't keep these guys around. And if they do keep these guys around, I don't care what the front office says. It's because Joe Burrow went on this media tour. So that's really where I stand with all of it.
Yeah, if I can just jump in real quick.
Yeah.
To to be the devil's advocate and to kind of understand Tom's side a little bit, the Bengals not following through on all the demands will put them in a really bad spot regardless. Like, let's say they don't, extend T. Higgins, but they go ahead and they restructure the contract with Trey Hendrickson, give him the money that he's owed. They give Jamar Chase the money that he needs, and they go out and fix the offensive line, and they add a couple defensive lineman pieces, and that puts them in a spot to where, like, even if they do make some right moves, at least at the start of the season, we're still going to be kind of like really upset with the team, and I'm sure Burrow will be upset with the team, and it just is a spot that you don't want to put your franchise in. You don't want to put your guy who's going to lead you to a Super Bowl in a spot where he's going to be upset. And to me, it's not really even about should they do it. It's that they need to finally come to terms with being a modern franchise. If you want to win in this league, there's only a couple ways to do it. One is to have the GOAT at quarterback and to have a magical run with guys that you've drafted. They tried that route. They tried to draft guys, and they haven't been very successful at that. So the other option is to start pushing these contracts a lot like the Browns, a lot like the Eagles, a lot like the Saints, a lot like the Rams. You push this money further down the line so you have every possible window to compete now and for the next 3 years, and then you suffer the consequences later when you can't get it done. But it frustrates me that we're kind of just like waiting the water, just kind of like,
well, it seems like there's a lack of urgency. It seems like we're still waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Yeah. They were the ones who reached out to Jamar Chase before last season. They did that. Jamar Chase had nothing to do with it. They said, hey, you want to make a deal? And then they offered him a bad deal. So, like, that's this front office. And we're sitting here on February 14th still waiting for anything to land. We're waiting for the Jamar deal still. That, again, they started last offseason. We're waiting for the T extension. We're waiting for a Trey extension. All while our starter quarterback is going on every single podcast show, TV show in the world trying to say, hey, guys, please pay somebody. Do something. And the longer it goes on, the longer I think the longer this fan base thinks that they're not going to do it. So my question to them is if you know you have to do it, just get it done. And if Jacob's right, if T's asking for $40 million a year, then it's a different story. But I don't think that's the case.
I don't necessarily think that's what he's asking
no,
for.
I'm
I don't
just
saying
think,
if he does weasel his way to the open market
correct.
somehow and gets offered that, and that's why he leaves, that's a different story. That's not the Bengals being cheap. That's a completely different
100%.
part of the context. But I do think the first step of all of this, we've circled the mid-March free agency deadline, but something everyone's going to freak out about, and there's no need to because we know what's happening. March 4th is the franchise tag deadline. T. Higgins will be franchise tagged. He 100% will be franchise tagged, and he will not play a game on it. There is no chance that he wants to or will, or should the Bengals have him play a game on it. That is not a smart way to organize contracts to tag him 2 years in a row when you could have just given him a 2-year extension last year. But they need to make sure he doesn't hit the open market. By tagging him, you eliminate that open market free agency. You can negotiate him on a long-term extension, or you can trade him and recoup some assets. That is the only option for the Bengals. They absolutely have to tag T. Higgins, and then you can figure out how the rest of this offseason goes. If T. Higgins hits open free agency, there is a 0% chance he's on the Bengals again next year.
We're spending a lot of time talking about all the players that the Bengals need to bring back. Coming up here in a little bit, we're going to talk about some of the players that the Bengals need to add. Because the one point that Tom was making yesterday, and I agreed with Jake when you were saying, so what Tom initially said is spending a lot of time bringing players back that you're not winning with right now.
Right.
And I think that I disagreed with him on that only because the reason that they had a chance to win games, and we forget, this team won 9 games. This team actually has not, back-to-back bad seasons, the back-to-back non-playoff seasons, but back-to-back 9-win above 500 seasons, technically, right? Like if we're, it's not a moral victory, but this team, it's not like they're winning 4 or 5 games a year. They're finishing above 500. They're still coming short, but they're still winning football games. You're failing to reach your goals with these players that you're trying to do everything in your power to keep. I understood what Tom was saying from that standpoint, but the bottom line is this idea that it has to be that or the other. It doesn't, and I think that's your guys' point. That hey, keep Trey, get T taken care of, get the deal done with Jamar Chase or whatever. If Gesicki's now part of the conversation, then great. But again, it doesn't mean that that's okay. We did that, so now we can't add anybody else. Why can't you do both? That's the thing. We talked about all this salary cap space that this team has. It needs to be both. And it should be both. And I think that sometimes we bail out, the organization gets bailed out when we do this. Well, they did that, so that's all they're going to do this offseason. Even if they extend Trey, they extend T, they get the deal done with Jamar Chase. If they do all of that, a lot of you out there would say, well, that's a successful offseason. No, if they do all of that and don't go heavy in free agency, it's still a failure of an offseason because then Tom is right. Then you just did all of that work to bring back core players of teams that weren't winning and didn't address the actual needs. And I have to say this too. I know you're going with Al Golden as the defensive coordinator because that signals we're going to go young on defense and it's about development. Those are buzzwords and code words for we're not going to spend money on the defense. And that's where I would be concerned too, because they're going to sell you on this hope of development and drafting and developing players and all this stuff. Sometimes that they're selling you on hope more than a game plan, and I don't like that approach either. I think, it's an approach. I don't trust them that they're doing it with the right intent. It sounds good, draft and develop. I don't think they're doing it with the right intent, though. I feel like that's their smokescreen of, hey, we're not going to spend money on defense, but hey, we got Al Golden. We're going to draft and develop young guys. You just got to be patient. This offseason is going to be fascinating the rest of the way.
Do I want them to pay people on the defense? Absolutely. Is that how it works when you have the many people we want to be paid on offense? No. Joe Burrow said, and what we're going off of this whole offseason is the Eagles model. They paid both their wide receivers. They paid their running back. They paid their quarterback big money. They paid their tight end big money. They paid their offensive line big money. And then they've drafted their defense. They've drafted starters on defense and gotten that to work, and that's how you have to live if you want to pay big money to a bunch of guys on offense. And that's where the Bengals are. And they have to start hitting in the draft. That's part of what you're doing with this, and including Trey Hendrickson in there. Once you pay an edge rusher that $20+ million, $25 million, you have to draft around the rest of the defense. There's just a level of need there that you didn't have before. The Bengals, during Joe Burrow's rookie contract, poured a lot of money into filling the holes that they were unable to address or missed on in the draft, but you don't have that luxury anymore once you pay these guys big money. And if the Bengals can't figure out how to draft, they're going to be screwed whether they sign T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson, and Jamar Chase or not. So I would prefer to keep the superstars and then try to draft well instead of letting them go and then trying to replace those few superstars you have been lucky enough to hit on with the draft that we don't know they'd be able to do.
You said superstars. I just wanted to point
shoot.
that out. But, yeah, I know. Let me. Here's the thing that Joe Burrow said. I think. Imagine if the Reds were saying, we need to do what the Dodgers do. This is a little drastic of a crossover here, but if the Reds said we need to do what the Dodgers do, I don't think that's realistic. And where I disagree with Joe Burrow, I think using the Eagles is a bad example because the Eagles operate differently than I'd say 80%, 85% of the league. So for the Reds, we would say, well, I think you want to aspire to be what the Rays are, right? Like, I think that's more of a realistic organization that the Reds can actually, they can operate more like the Rays. The Reds will never operate like the Dodgers or the Yankees, right? I think we can all agree on that. So we'll look at the Rays and say, if the Reds can operate like that, the Eagles operate completely different because of the wealth of the owner, and it's different. I know everyone says billionaire owner, Mike Brown's a billionaire, but it is different for the cash-rich owner, and that is the Eagles. I don't like the Eagles comparison for the Bengals. I'm curious your take on that. And if there was a team, if there's an organization in football that the Bengals need to modernize their approach around like we do with the Reds to the Rays. Who is that team? And it sounds. Did you disagree with that, or where are you at with that? Like, do you?
Well,
I don't like the Eagles comparison.
Well, I think that in the NFL, you're all playing under the salary cap. Like you know what you have to work with. You know you can be the Eagles. You absolutely can be. In baseball, you cannot be the Yankees if you're the Cincinnati Reds. You cannot be the Dodgers if you're the Cincinnati Reds. It's physically impossible to do that. You could absolutely do what the Eagles are doing. There's a way to structure these contracts that don't destroy the franchise. There's a way to do all of it under the salary cap, which everybody's playing by the same rules. Everybody knows the same limits, and I think that the Bengals absolutely could be like the best franchise in football, right? You can make your organization like the Chiefs. You can make your organization like the Patriots. You can do it that way because by the rules, by everything that's instilled in the NFL, you have that ability. That's the best part, the parity. There's so much levelness, if that's a word, in this league. You can absolutely be the Eagles if you're Mike Brown and the Bengals. They just don't want to be.
And Jake, I'll let you take it.
No, yeah, Elliot stole what I was going to say. I think the salary cap kind of voids all of that. I think everyone has the ability to play under the same umbrella. So the Bengals just, if they want to, they could. Now, does Mike Brown have as much cash on hand? No. As Jeffrey Lurie? No. But can he get it? For sure. There's ways for these billionaire owners to get the money that they need to get. He sold naming rights to the stadium in order to get the money for Joe Burrow. There's ways to find the money to get all that stuff done. And if you work under the salary cap, then I'm not going to give the guy an excuse for not having the cash if it worked under the financial constraints the NFL gives you, because I refuse to believe there's not a way that a guy worth $4 billion, $3.9 billion, depending on where you look, can't find that cash.
So the only slight pushback there, and I agree, but you could also say with baseball, everyone operates with the same rules of there is no salary cap. So the Reds could just, spend more money. You could say, well, they don't have the same amount of money as them. It's the same thing with the Brown family. They, from the standpoint of the Bengals have to do all of these things to be able to get enough money to put in escrow for the fully guaranteed contracts. Those other teams, technically, they don't have to they already have the money. They already have that money. They don't have to do things. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have to do things to get that money. The Bengals have to do things to get that money. The Dodgers don't have to do things to get these contracts done. They already have that money. The Reds have to do things to get the money that the Dodgers have.
But that's part of the thing that puts the Bengals in a bad spot on those contracts is that they're not willing to put the guarantees beyond year 1 and year 2. So they have to put more money up there. If they were able to space out guarantees, we looked at the graphic on here a couple of days ago after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, what the cap hits were for similar contracts between the two teams, and the Eagles were drastically less. So it all comes down to creativity of contracts, and granted, restructures and stuff along those lines goes back to what you're saying. You need cash in order to be able to do that. But if we went back 3 years, I'm not even saying go back a decade. If we went back 2-3 years and they operated like a modern franchise, they'd be in a much easier boat this offseason cash-wise. So if you start to change this offseason, is it difficult? Sure. This will probably be the hardest offseason financially that this front office and ownership will ever have to go through. But if you start the changes now, it makes those changes easier as we get down the road. And then eventually, when we're sitting here in 2030 and Joe Burrow's contract is up and we're talking about extensions for him and whoever that new core is at that point, we don't have to worry about all this stuff of extending 3 stars in the same offseason because they've modernized, they've moved the contracts around, they've done it earlier, and then you don't have this problem of having to guarantee, $220 million in one offseason, which is very, very hard to do. But you have to start somewhere, and they've backed themselves into such a corner this offseason with these stars and not drafting well to have replacements on the roster that I don't think they have a choice.
Justin, and just again, I'm not just trying to pick a fight here, but the Eagles owner, Jeffrey Lurie, $5 billion he's worth. Mike Brown, $4 billion. Bob Castellini, $400 million. The Dodgers payroll for just this season, $320 million. Like that's the game we're playing. Our owner and the Eagles owner is off by $1 billion, and I'm not saying the billion's not a lot of money. But the payroll for the Dodgers is worth more than our owner for just this season. Like that's the type of game we're playing here. Like if the Brown family wants to have money, they can have money. They can spend money. They can reallocate funds. I don't care what they do. They have $1 billion less than the Eagles guy. I like that to me is like that's not Bob Castellini playing with the Dodgers. That's a completely different sport.
The other thing the Eagles owner did that the Browns were the only owner to vote against and still haven't said anything about going that direction is as soon as they were allowed to sell percentages of their ownership to venture capital groups to have more cash on hand, Jeffrey Lurie was the first owner to do so. The Eagles were the first team to do so that they had, as Kinner's saying, more cash readily available to put in escrow for these contracts when they have to get their guys done. Again, the Bengals just turning down opportunities to make these struggles easier. That's why I'm done giving them the out for not having money. There's ways to get more money, and they just say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to operate, with full control. We're not going to give anything up, and we're not going to give this team the best chance to win. So this offseason is the end of me giving the Bengals outs because I think the NFL has given them plenty of routes to even the playing field in that respect, and they just keep saying we're not going to do it. So if you think you can do it on your own, great, then do it on your own. If you don't think you can do it on your own, take the help the NFL is giving you that plenty of other teams have taken.